I've never liked champagne. Not the taste, not the bubbles, not the way people pretend it means joy. But I drank it that day. I let it touch my lips like tradition demanded. And I smiled. Through the gloss, through the nerves, through the dress that felt a little too tight and the shoes that pinched at the back. The toast came later. My father stood beside my husband, well, now ex-husband, but that part comes later, and clinked his glass with too much certainty. He was beaming, not at me, but at James. Beaming the way he used to at me when I was 5 and tried on his office shoes, clumsily shuffling down the hall like some tiny executive in training. To James, he said, finally, the son I never had. Everyone laughed. It was meant to be a joke, I think. The room echoed with polite chuckles and the sound of more glasses meeting glass. But mine didn't move. My fingers gripped the stem so tightly I thought it might snap. The son he never had. I stood right, there in white, in front of him, a daughter on her wedding day, and I swear he didn't even notice what he'd done. He raised his glass again, smiling like he'd nailed the punchline. Something inside me went very, very quiet. That night, the reception blurred into noise. Speeches, dancing, cake. I danced. With James once, twice. Posed for photos, kissed cheeks, said thank you 100 times. And all the while, my father's words played on a loop in my head. Not a scream, not a shout. Just that cold, clean crack. The way glass breaks neatly before it spills. I didn't cry. I waited until the lights dimmed and the guests had gone, until James had collapsed half drunk on the hotel bed, tie loosened and snoring already. I changed out of my dress, folded it, put it in the bag with the tag still dangling off the zipper. I left the ring on the nightstand. I took my suitcase, already packed, already zipped, and I walked out of the room, out of the hotel, into the night. No one stopped me. I didn't write a note. I didn't text, didn't call. I just walked. Not because I was running, but because I was done. That moment, those 9 words, ripped the last thread between me and the version of myself they'd tried to mold. The good daughter, the people pleaser, the one who never caused trouble. She died the moment he lifted that glass. The girl who left her wedding didn't disappear. She just stopped asking for permission. It was strange how easy it was to vanish. No dramatic airport sprint, no stormy confrontation, just pavement underfoot, the hum of a street lamp, and the quiet knowledge that no one would think to look for me that night. Everyone would assume I was asleep beside James, or maybe in the bathroom, or at the bar downstairs. I had hours, maybe more. I headed to the train station, dragging my suitcase behind me like a limb I hadn't quite detached yet. It clicked over the pavement with that hollow sound wheels make when you're alone, and it's too late, and the world feels like it's holding its breath. The woman at the ticket counter didn't look twice when I asked for a one-way to Brighton. That's the place that came to mind. Salt air, white cliffs, nowhere to hide, and yet nowhere to be found. "Are you running from something?" she asked, a little smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "No," I said. "I'm walking towards something." She nodded like she understood, though I doubt she did. People love the idea of escape, but not the reality of it. They like it in novels, in films, when it's neat and cinematic. But in real life, it's not music swelling and wind in your hair. It's silence. It's standing on a cold platform in a borrowed coat, with no plan beyond getting away from everything that ever told you who to be. I sat by the window on the train, watching the lights blur past. My reflection stared back at me, pale and bare-faced, with eyes that didn't blink. It was the first time I'd seen her, really seen her, in years, and I didn't look away. By morning, I was in a rented room above a bakery that smelled of burnt sugar and bread. The woman who owned it didn't ask questions, just handed me a key and said, "Bathroom's down the hall. Don't lock yourself. Out." There, in that cramped room with floral curtains and a mattress that dipped in the middle, I slept. For 12 hours straight. No dreams, no thoughts, just a blackout. When I woke up, I didn't cry, didn't panic. I just breathed. And then I opened my laptop. The emails were already pouring in. James, my father, my stepmother, even a few guests who probably thought I'd been kidnapped or had some sort of breakdown. I deleted them all, without reading. I wasn't ready to give them words. I made a list instead of things I'd always wanted but had never been allowed to want. Photography classes, a job that didn't involve pretending to be someone's daughter or wife, a place of my own, freedom, and somewhere near the bottom to look my father in the eye and say, "You don't get to define me anymore." It wasn't a revenge plan yet, but it was the first brick. Her name is Vanessa. Even now, I can say it without flinching, though there was a time when the sound of it made me feel like I'd swallowed nails. Vanessa. Blonde, lacquered, younger than my mother ever was in her final years. I was 15 when she moved in, 16 when she married my father. By 17, I'd stopped saying much of anything at all. People love to call women like Vanessa elegant, poised. She always had that careful calm, like she never raised her voice unless it was calculated. My father said she brought peace to the house. What he meant was, she didn't remind him of pain, of the woman who came before. But I remembered Mom's laughter in the kitchen, her garden hands, her terrible taste in music. I remembered how she made me feel seen in a house full of schedules and silence. And I remembered how quickly her name stopped being mentioned once Vanessa arrived, like she was just a phase we'd all outgrown. Vanessa tried with me at first, bought me gifts I didn't want, took me shopping for clothes I didn't wear, told me how lucky I was to have a father who cared. Her kindness always came, in the shape of control, smiling suggestions that ended in corrections, posture, nail polish. "Don't slouch, Claire. It looks so defeatist." But it was the little things that left the deepest cuts. Like when she took my mother's wedding china out of the cabinet and replaced it with her own, or when she started calling me sweetheart, like she'd earned the right, or the way she touched my father's arm when she wanted him to dismiss me. I think what hurt most was how easily he let her. He started quoting her. Vanessa says, as if her opinions came pre-approved, as if his daughter had become too difficult, too emotional, too inconvenient to believe. That wedding toast was just the final blow in a decade of slow erasure. Finally, the son I never had, as if I hadn't been enough, as if love had always been conditional, on compliance, on silence, on disappearing into a version of myself they could manage. I didn't leave just because of the toast. I left because I finally saw the truth. They had replaced me a long time ago. And I had let them, but not anymore. Brighton became my cocoon. I started taking photos, at first just on my phone, then with a proper camera I bought secondhand. I worked part-time at the bakery downstairs. The smell of bread became my anchor. The sound of the sea, my therapy. I was still grieving, but not just for the past. I was grieving the version of me that had waited for permission to live. And something else, something colder, was beginning to stir in the space she left behind. They always told me I was too sensitive, that I took things the wrong way, that I misunderstood intentions. But the truth is, I understood too well. I understood that love in our house was earned through obedience, through staying quiet, staying small, and I'd done that for too long. Now, in Brighton, surrounded by salt air and strangers, I finally had space to breathe and think. For the first few weeks after I left, I drifted. Woke up at odd hours, slept in my clothes, ate whatever I could, scavenged from the bakery at closing. But slowly, the fog lifted. I started journaling again, taking photos with intent, writing down ideas, fragmented thoughts about family, power, identity, about inheritance, not just of money, but of silence. That's when the idea first struck me. Not revenge, exactly. Not at first. More like reclamation. I'd been written out of their lives like an afterthought. My mother's memory, scrubbed, clean. My opinions, ignored. My worth, determined by whether I could smile and sit straight at dinner. So, what if I wrote myself back in? Not the way they expected, though. Not with apologies or letters begging to be let back in, but with fire, with something undeniable. I didn't know exactly what it would look like yet, but I knew it would start with telling the truth. My truth. And I knew that meant taking control of the narrative before they could twist it. So I did something terrifying. I started a blog, anonymous at first, just musings about family and betrayal, about being replaced. Each post was like pulling a splinter out of my skin. Painful, yes, but cleansing. I wrote about Vanessa's curated perfection, about my father's quiet cruelty, about grief that had no place in their polished world. And people listened. Comments started rolling in. Messages from strangers, mostly women, who saw themselves in the words, who'd been erased, overlooked, underestimated. It was like finding a secret army. Invisible, but strong. One woman messaged me and said, "You're not bitter, you're awake." That sentence lived in my head for weeks. I started thinking bigger. If I could write my way out of the box they put me in, why not do more? Why not build something? Something mine. Something undeniable. I began researching. I took free online business courses, watched endless videos about branding, storytelling, digital presence. I studied photography like it was survival, started freelancing for local cafes and artists, trading photos for rent money. And I worked, every day, morning to night, quietly building a life that didn't require their approval. Because I knew something they didn't. I was never the problem. I was just inconvenient to a story they wanted to tell. And now, I was writing my own. It started with a photo, a candid shot I'd taken of a woman standing in the middle of the Brighton pier, her coat billowing in the wind, eyes closed like she was breathing the entire world in. I posted it with a caption that read, "You don't owe your silence to the people who silenced you." It went viral, not in the explosive 15 minutes of fame way, more like wildfire in a dry forest. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. By the end of the week, my inbox was full. Not just from strangers, but from editors, podcasters, even a women's advocacy group asking if I'd speak at one of their events. I didn't have the courage to speak yet, but I said yes anyway. Because fear was what they taught me, and I was unlearning everything. I built a new identity, not fake, just protected. My writing, my photography, my story, it became a brand. No name, no face, just words and truth. And people leaned in. Meanwhile, back home, I was still the scandal, the bride who ran, the daughter who disappeared. I didn't have to check to know Vanessa had spun the narrative, how fragile I'd always been, how I'd had a moment, how Daddy had tried everything. I could practically hear her perform it. But I didn't care. Not really, because their spotlight no longer blinded me. I saw them, though. Vanessa had a charity now. Something about supporting young women in crisis. The irony nearly made me laugh. My father gave speeches at business dinners, quoting things I'd once written in my school essays, as if they were his. They hosted events in the house I grew up in. My mother's rose garden had been ripped out, replaced by lavender hedges and ceramic fountains. I know, because someone I went to school with posted photos from one of the events. It wasn't pain I felt anymore. It was distance. They had their world, and I had mine. But I hadn't forgotten. I didn't need to destroy them, not in the dramatic movie-ending sense, but I would tell the truth. I would make sure the girl I used to be, the one who stayed quiet, who smiled through the ache, who waited for someone to choose her, was never mistaken for gone. She wasn't gone. She had simply transformed. And part of that transformation meant facing them. Eventually. Not because I needed their acceptance, but because I wanted to look them in the eye and show them what they failed to erase. So, I made a plan. It would take time. But that night, on the pier, as the waves crashed below and my coat caught the wind like wings, I made a promise to myself. You won't go back for closure. You'll go back for clarity. And when you do, they won't recognize you. I didn't go home to confront them right away. That would have been too easy, too satisfying in a way that never really lasts. Instead, I built something. Not just a life, but a voice. I started speaking at events. Small ones at first, back rooms of bookshops, community centers, feminist, art galleries in crumbling old buildings with bad lighting and brilliant people. They listened. They didn't know the full story, of course. I wasn't ready to tell it yet. But I talked about control, about erasure, about what happens when you grow up in a house where your voice is a threat and silence is mistaken for grace. I shared my photographs. Women, mostly. Women who looked like they had survived something, even if they didn't say it out loud. One night, after a talk in Manchester, a girl no older than 18 came up to me. She looked like a version of me I hadn't seen in years. Soft around the edges, eyes full of apology, like she'd rehearsed being sorry before she'd even spoken. "I'm scared I'll always feel small," she said. I told her something I hadn't planned on saying. "They made you small. That doesn't mean you are." Her face changed, like someone had handed her the permission she'd been told not to ask for. And I realized something then. Maybe it wasn't just about facing them. Maybe it was about making sure girls like her, like me, never had to ask for that kind of permission again. Still, the part of me that had packed that suitcase on my wedding night, the part that had walked past the floral arch and out into the dark, heels clicking like punctuation marks on cold stone, she still wanted reckoning. Not revenge. Reckoning. I had taken so much. My father's toast, that one line, hadn't just shattered the night. It had confirmed everything I'd feared for years, that I was never really seen. Not as a daughter, not as a woman, not as someone with her own story, only as an accessory to his. But I had my own mirrors now, my own audience, and I had begun to write the story no one else was brave enough to tell. I submitted a piece anonymously to a major publication. And essay about inheritance, control, and the quiet violence of being dismissed by the people who claim to love you. It went viral in a different way, quiet and powerful. It was quoted in panels, shared in lectures. People used it as a teaching tool in universities. It was me, but they didn't know it. Yet. My father's company reached out to the editor, asking if they could adapt parts of it into a leadership seminar. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Nambefreinti Saindiet said yes, but I was the one who would present it, face to face. And that was how the reckoning began. I arrived at the building wearing black, not because I wanted to look severe, though that was a bonus, but because it made me feel like I had armor on, a well-cut suit, hair tied back, no jewelry, no softness, just the weight of purpose. The receptionist didn't recognize me. Why would she? I wasn't the daughter dragged to charity balls anymore, blinking under chandeliers and careful smiles. I was just another guest speaker, escorted to the executive boardroom with bottled water on the table and sleek screens waiting for content. When I saw the nameplate on the glass door, Michael Rutherford, CEO, I felt the ghost of something stir in my chest. Not fear, not even anger, really. Just a recognition, like facing a painting I used to hate, now only mildly interesting. He walked in with a few others from the company, still tall, still commanding the room like it owed him something. But his hair was thinner now, his skin more weathered. There was a moment, just one, where our eyes met, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. He didn't know who I was. Not yet. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reveal. Not at first. I launched straight into the presentation. Slides. Carefully curated. A minimalist design. My voice steady. I spoke about institutional silence, about how businesses often mimic the family systems they're built from, about leadership styles that reward obedience and punish autonomy. I cited examples, case studies, even a few throwaway lines that sounded eerily personal if you were listening closely. He was listening. I could see that now. Something was shifting in his posture, a rigidity, like a man remembering something too late. And then, slide 31, the essay. I read the excerpt aloud. When your father calls your new husband the son he never had, you don't cry. Not at first. You pack, you walk, you leave the version of yourself they built like a monument to their comfort, and you build a new world instead. One where your voice isn't a threat. One where silence doesn't look like grace. The room was dead silent. He finally spoke. "You wrote that." I nodded. "I did." His face went pale. "Claire," I cut him off with a look. The kind that silences years. The kind that says, "Don't you dare act like this is yours to explain." "I didn't come here to hear apologies," I said. "I came to reclaim the story." There it was. No grand confrontation, no shouting, just truth, laid bare. He'd expected fury, maybe a scene. But I wasn't a daughter standing in his house anymore. I was a woman standing in her power. I had no script for that. And in that moment, I knew. I'd taken back the narrative. And I wasn't done yet. I wasn't planning on seeing her again. But plans, I've learned, are mostly just the scaffolding we build to feel in control. Life, real, messy, inconvenient life, doesn't always care about our blueprints. I saw her at a gallery, of all places. A charity exhibit, one of those evenings filled with ambient jazz and people pretending they understand abstract work. I didn't go there to find her. I went because someone from my publishing team had invited me. And yet, there she was. Colette. The woman who replaced my mother. Her hair was still perfect. Her posture still rehearsed. But she looked older, somehow smaller under the white gallery lights. Time had touched her face. Not cruelly, but honestly. And in that moment, I realized something almost ridiculous. She was just a person. Not the monster I'd built in my mind. Not the elegant thief who stole my father's attention and hollowed our home of softness. Just a woman, flawed, tired, human. I didn't walk away. I should have, maybe, but I didn't. "Colette," I said, and she turned like someone hearing, a voice from a dream. Her eyes widened. "Claire!" My name in her mouth still felt sharp. We stood in silence for a beat. Two women on opposite ends of an invisible war. "You look well," she said. I smiled just enough. "I am." She nodded, then looked down at her glass. "I heard about the talk. Your father's been quiet lately. I imagine he's had a lot to think about." Another silence, longer this time, and then something I didn't expect. I was never trying to replace her. I blinked. "You didn't have to try." That stung. I saw it land in her expression. "You were just there," I added, and somehow her name stopped being said in the house. Her photos disappeared, the food changed, the music changed, everything changed, except you, sitting in her chair like it had always been yours. She closed her eyes for half a second. "He didn't know how to grieve. Michael needed structure, not sadness. I gave him that. And I didn't fit into that structure, did I?" "No," she said. "Honest, too honest. You reminded him of what he lost." That hit harder than anything else, because maybe it was true. I looked at her and saw someone who had built a life out of compromise, just like he had. A life without questions, without echoes. And in their design, there was no room for a daughter who remembered. "I'm not here to fight you," I said. "I've fought enough." She nodded. "Then why did you come?" "To see if you were still made of marble." "And?" "You're not." I left her there, by the painting of broken porcelain. And I didn't look back. The drive home felt heavier than it should have. The roads blurred under the dim streetlights, and I barely noticed the turns I made. My thoughts were tangled in that brief, awkward exchange with Colette, trying to make sense of it, trying to decide if it mattered or not. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I hadn't realized just how much of my life I'd spent thinking about her place in my father's life, about the space she'd occupied in the house where I grew up. She was the intruder, the replacement, and yet, standing there in front of her, I saw something I hadn't expected: vulnerability. A woman who in many ways was as lost as I had been. She'd wanted to be the answer to a broken man's need, and in doing so, she became the embodiment of everything I resented. But Colette wasn't my real enemy. The anger I carried for years, it had to be redirected. By the time I reached my flat, the weight of the evening was pressing down on me, and I still hadn't fully unpacked what it all meant. I sat down at the kitchen table, running my fingers over the rim of a coffee mug I'd long since stopped using. I'd become someone else in the years since I'd left. Someone I didn't quite recognize, but who was starting to look back at me from the mirror. The phone rang, cutting through the silence like a warning bell. Claire? It was Emma, my sister. The one who hadn't asked where I'd gone. The one who'd stayed behind and built her life around the same routines I'd walked away from. I didn't want to leave, you know, she said, her voice tight but familiar. I didn't want to leave him, but he needed me. I had to stay. The guilt in her voice twisted something in me. She hadn't been able to escape. I know, I said softly. I know you had, to do what you thought was right. But you didn't. None of us did. I wasn't supposed to know what you were going through. Her words stung, and there was something in them that felt like an apology. You weren't supposed to know, I repeated. None of us were, but we all let it happen. Me too. There was a pause. I wish you'd told me. I always thought you were just strong. Strong! The word felt strange coming from her, because in my mind I was anything but. But maybe to Emma, I'd seemed that way. I'm not strong, Emma. I'm just here, but I won't stay here anymore. Not for any of them. Another silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something close to understanding. You'll figure it out, Claire, Emma said. You always do. I hung up the phone, and for a moment, I sat still in the dark of my flat. I had one decision left to make, one that would change everything. It was time to move. The next few days passed in a blur. I spent more time than I'd like to admit, scrolling through old photos and memories, piecing together fragments of a life I had tried to bury. My father's face in every family portrait, smiling as if nothing had ever torn us apart. My mother's absence, always present, a reminder of everything I'd lost before I ever had the chance to understand what that loss meant. But then there was the rage that pulsed through my veins, tightening my chest, making it hard to breathe when I thought of him, of the man who raised me but never truly saw me, of the man who could dismiss my existence so easily, so callously. I couldn't let it go. I stood in front of the mirror and stared at my reflection for what felt like an eternity. Who was I now? Who had I become in the years since I'd left? It was hard to say, but something inside me shifted when I thought of him, of my father raising a glass to my new husband as though he were the son he'd always wanted. It cut deeper than I cared to admit that moment. It wasn't just the words. It was the weight of years of expectation. The years of me trying to prove I was enough, trying to be something he could be proud of. Now I knew the truth. I wasn't the daughter he wanted. I wasn't the one who fit into his carefully constructed world. And I wasn't going to keep trying to be. I needed to leave. Leave this place, leave this life I'd been clinging to, and start something new. But there was one more thing to do before I could go. The truth. The one I had never been willing to face. I grabbed my keys and my coat, the cold air outside wrapping itself around me as I stepped out into the night. The drive was automatic, my hands gripping the wheel as my thoughts spiraled. It wasn't until I reached my destination that I finally felt the weight of what I had to do. The old house, the place where it all began, where my childhood had been twisted into something unrecognizable. It looked as it always had, quiet, still, and imposing. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, I wasn't the little girl waiting for validation. Tonight, I wasn't the daughter who had to fight for a place at the table. I walked up to the door with purpose, feeling the cold stone beneath my feet, the heavy weight of everything I was about to confront. Inside, I could hear the soft murmur of voices. My father and Colette, no doubt. My pulse quickened as I lifted my hand to the doorbell. The sound rang out like a death knell in the silence of the night. Colette opened the door, her smile fading when she saw me. "Claire," she started, But I didn't give her the chance to finish. "I'm not here for you," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "I'm here to see him." Colette's face fell, and for the first time, I saw her look something other than smug. I stepped past her into the house where I used to live, where I once thought I had a future. It was empty now, just the shells of the lives that had come and gone. I found him in his study, sitting behind a desk, his back to me as I entered. "Claire," he said without turning around, "you're back." And in that moment, I realized I had no need to explain myself to him, no need to ask for his approval. I was here to set the record straight. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady, finally free of the years of hesitation. He didn't answer. "Done trying to be what you wanted," I continued. "Done trying to be your perfect daughter." He finally looked up, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes there was something I hadn't expected. Regret. For a moment, we just stood there in the silence, a father and daughter who'd both been playing roles for too long. Then, I walked. Away. I didn't look back as I walked out of the house. The weight of those words hung between us, unspoken yet understood. My father didn't stop me, didn't ask me to stay. He never did. He'd never really been the type to chase after anyone, least of all me. And that was the most freeing thing about it. The cold air hit me hard as I stepped into the night, the city lights casting long shadows across the street. My mind raced, but beneath the chaos of my thoughts, there was a quiet certainty. I had finally done what I needed to do. I had broken free from the past, from the expectations, from the person I'd been trying to appease for so long. But now I had to figure out what came next. I headed straight for my apartment, the familiar hum of the city around me doing little to calm the storm inside. The truth was, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what kind of life I was supposed to build now that everything I'd once known had crumbled. The woman I'd been, the one who walked out of that wedding, heartbroken, angry, uncertain, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone who was no longer willing to wait for permission to exist, to be seen, to be heard. The realization hit me hard in that moment. I wasn't just walking away from my father. I was walking away from everything I had been trying to hold on to, the image of myself that had been defined by their expectations, by their judgment, by their version of who I should be. I couldn't do it anymore. But as the door clicked shut behind me, something I hadn't expected crept into my chest, a soft pang of regret. Not for leaving, not for walking away from a life that had never really been mine, but for the woman I'd left behind. The woman who had spent years waiting for something that was never going to come. I stood in front of the mirror again, the silence of the apartment heavy around me. I barely recognized the reflection staring back. And yet, I couldn't ignore the fire in my chest, the desire to rebuild, to reshape everything that had been broken. I had always been told to hold back, to wait for permission, to fit into the mold others had carved for me. But now, I was the one in control. No more apologies. No more waiting. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. The last few years had shown me that I couldn't do this alone. I'd need allies, people who saw me, not the girl they wanted me to be, but the woman I was becoming. I called the first person who came to mind. "Claire?" Her voice came through, familiar but distant. "I need your help," I said, the words sounding strange coming from my mouth. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. "Of course. What do you need?" "Everything," I replied, simply. "I need everything. I'm starting over." The days that followed felt like a blur. I buried myself in the whirlwind of change, pulling every ounce of energy into making something out of the wreckage. I knew that this was my only shot at truly starting over, and there was no room for hesitation. Every decision I made now was a brick in the foundation of the life I was rebuilding. My apartment, which had once been filled with the echoes of a life I'd never chosen, began to reflect the person I was becoming. I threw out the old furniture, the photos that reminded me of the woman I'd been, and anything that felt like it had been placed with someone else's vision in mind. It was all gone. I replaced it with pieces that made sense to me now. Clean lines, a stark simplicity that felt like a breath of fresh air. I didn't waste any time thinking about my family. If I was going to truly break free, I needed to stop clinging to their approval. But it wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. There were moments late at night when I'd catch myself wondering if I had made the right choice. Had I overreacted? Was I being selfish? But then I'd remember the look in my father's eyes, the casual cruelty of his words, and the decision would solidify again. No, I wasn't wrong. I wasn't the one who had failed. As I began to adjust to the silence, I found myself growing stronger. It wasn't just about getting away from them. It was about finding who I truly was, when I wasn't constantly shaped by their demands. I started to work on things I'd put off for years, learning to trust my instincts, pursuing the kind of career that excited me, and reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. And then there was the matter of my own identity. The woman I was now needed to be strong, bold, and unapologetic. But even with all this forward momentum, there was one thing that still gnawed at me: my father's new wife. Even now, the thought of her made something dark twist in my stomach. She wasn't just a stepmother in the traditional sense. She was the replacement, the one who filled the space my mother had left behind. And she was the one who had taken my place, had taken everything as far as I was concerned. I had told myself that I wasn't going to let it affect me, that I was above it. But it wasn't that simple. The way she'd waltzed into our lives, the way my father had so easily accepted her, it wasn't just betrayal, it felt like erasure. My mother was gone, but she wasn't the only one who'd been replaced. I had to do something about it. I hadn't fully figured out how yet, but I knew one thing. My family wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. They would try to bring me back in, they would try to make me fit their mold again, but I wouldn't let them, not anymore. So I began to plan. And the first thing on my list was seeing her, face to face, the woman who had replaced my mother. It was time to remind her that I was still here. The day I decided to see her came sooner than I had anticipated. It wasn't something I'd planned to rush into, but something inside me stirred. And it was like I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to see her, face to face, to understand who she really was in the flesh, to look her in the eye and feel what was left of the woman who had once been my mother's closest friend. I hadn't told anyone I was going. My friends had encouraged me to move on, to leave the past where it belonged. But I knew I couldn't let go until I understood why she had taken the place I'd once held so firmly in our family. It was more than just being the new wife. She was now a permanent fixture in my father's world, a world I no longer had access to. I pulled up to the house, my father's house. It looked the same, grand, stoic, as it always had. But there was a strange emptiness about it now. My footsteps echoed against the gravel as I walked up to the front door. There was a quiet finality in the way it all felt. This was no longer my home, no matter how many memories tried to sneak in. I rang the doorbell, the chime echoing inside, sharp and insistent. After a moment, the door opened, and there she stood. Her smile was warm, too warm for my liking, her eyes trying to read me. "Claire," she said, her voice betraying no hint of surprise. She was prepared for this moment. "It's been a long time?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took in the way she stood there, her posture poised, as though nothing had changed. But I knew better. Her presence was a calculated one. Everything about her screamed that she was firmly in control. She was everything my mother had never been: polished, collected, and determined to make sure she took up every inch of the space she was given. I stepped past her, entering the foyer, not waiting for an invitation. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice low but firm. There was no room for hesitation now. She led me into the living room, where she gestured for me to sit. I could see how she'd redecorated everything to match her own taste, a reflection of her personality, I suppose. I had a sudden urge to rip it all apart, to remind her that this wasn't her place to claim, but I held back. "So, what is it, Claire?" she asked, her voice far too calm for my liking. "What's on your mind?" I could feel the tension in the air between us, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a battle for something that had been stolen from me. For a moment, I felt a wave of anger rise in me, but I pushed it down. I wasn't here to lose control. I just wanted you to know that I see you, I said, my voice cold but steady. I know what you're doing. I know what you've done. Her smile faltered, just slightly, but she recovered quickly, her composure unbroken. I'm sorry if you feel threatened, Claire. That was never my intention. It was too much, and yet not enough. I stood up abruptly, my hands clenched at my sides. You don't get it, do you? I whispered, though it felt more like a shout inside my head. You've stolen everything. My father, my home, my place in this family. Her eyes softened, but I could see the steel beneath. You think I took your place? She asked, almost kindly. I didn't. I'm just here, trying to make a life. And what about mine? I snapped, stepping closer. What about the life you destroyed? Her gaze remained unwavering. You're angry, and you have every right to be. She said, her voice lower now. But this, what you're doing, this isn't going to help. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because she was right. Nothing about this conversation could undo what had happened, and nothing would bring back the things I had lost. I turned on my heel and left, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I didn't go back to the house again after that. It was too much, too raw. Facing her, seeing her so unfazed by everything. I felt, by everything I had lost, it made the hurt more unbearable. But what was even worse was the realization that I was wasting my time sitting in the rubble of something that was never coming back. I drove for hours, not really knowing where I was going. The road stretched ahead of me, empty and endless, mirroring the feeling inside me. I couldn't shake the weight of the conversation I'd had with her, the smooth, calculated way she'd deflected my accusations. She didn't even seem to understand why I was angry, why it mattered to me. To her, this was just the way things were. She didn't need to fight for her place. She had simply taken it. I pulled into a small cafe, a quiet place I used to visit when I wanted to escape from the noise of everything back home. It felt like a lifetime ago that I'd sat here, sipping coffee and dreaming about a future that didn't seem so far away. But now, the table in front of me felt different. The dreams I'd once had been knocked down, scattered in pieces, that I wasn't sure I could ever put together again. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, lost in thought, before I finally made up my mind. The decision came to me in fragments, small pieces of clarity slipping through the fog. I couldn't keep chasing after something that no longer existed, something that was never going to be mine again. The life I'd had before everything changed, was gone. But I didn't need it back. I didn't need my father's approval, and I didn't need to compete with her. What I needed was control. The kind of control I'd spent years trying to reclaim, but had never quite grasped. It was time to build something of my own, to take back the life that had been taken from me in the only way I knew how, on my own terms. I left the cafe with a newfound resolve, the quiet buzz of 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. But one thought stood out above all the rest. It was time to destroy everything they thought they controlled. The plan had been set in motion months ago, even before I left the wedding that day. But now it was more than just an abstract idea. It was real, and I would see it through, no matter the cost. The road home felt shorter this time, more direct. I had a purpose now, something to work toward. And when I got there, I wasn't sure what I would find, if anything, but I knew I was no longer the girl who had disappeared. I wasn't just going to vanish, I was going to make them understand. When I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in front of me like a prison. It was hard to recognize it, hard to imagine it had ever been home. The pristine lawns, the perfectly aligned windows, the front door that once felt like a warm welcome. Now, everything about it felt suffocating, cold. It had been too long, and yet, not long enough. I sat there for a moment, the engine idling, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I hadn't anticipated how strange it would feel to be back. The streets I used to walk, the familiar sights and sounds, they all seemed alien now. So much had changed in me, and the thought of confronting all of it was like staring into the abyss. But I wasn't going to back down now. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing on my chest. It had been months since I'd left everything behind. Months since I'd watched them tear apart the life I had built for myself. And in that time, I had rebuilt myself too. I wasn't the girl who had stood at the altar, eyes full of hope and fear. I wasn't the woman who had allowed herself to fade into the background. I was someone else entirely, someone who had learned to survive on her own terms. The door creaked as I stepped out of the car, the sound oddly familiar, a reminder of how many times I'd walked that same path. The porch light flickered above me, casting long shadows across the gravel. I hesitated for a moment before walking up the steps, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe an apology, though I knew that was far too much to hope for. Maybe an explanation, though I knew it wouldn't matter anymore. All I knew was that I was here to face them, to show them that I was no longer the same. I knocked once, twice. The sound echoed, louder than I remembered. The door opened slowly, and there she was. The woman who had replaced my mother. The woman who had taken everything from me without a second thought. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening with surprise. It took her a moment to speak, but when she did, her voice was cool, almost dismissive. "Claire," she said, like she had been expecting me, even though I knew she hadn't. "Is my father home?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. Her eyes flickered briefly before she stepped aside to let me in. I didn't care whether she invited me in or not. I was already here, and there was no going back now. The house smelled like fresh flowers and something else, a strange, sterile scent that hadn't been there when my mother was alive. I could almost hear my father's laugh echoing through the hall, feel the warmth of the family dinners we used to have around this table. But all of that was gone now. "You've come back," she said, her voice softer now, almost too soft. It didn't surprise me. She was always calculating, always playing the part. "I didn't come back for you," I replied, my words cutting through the silence. "I came back for him." The silence between us thickened, and for the first time since I arrived, I could see it, the uncertainty in her eyes, the crack in her perfect facade. It wasn't enough to make me feel sorry for her, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't the only one who had lost something. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her eyes never leaving mine. It was like she was trying to read me, trying to figure out what had changed in me since I walked out of their lives. But the truth was, she didn't know me. Not really. She never had, and neither did he. "Claire," she finally said, her voice tight with forced politeness. "I'm sure this isn't how you imagined coming home." I wanted to laugh. Home. It hadn't been home for a long time, not since the day my father made his choice, not since I had watched him, her, standing there, so smug, so sure of herself, while everything I had ever known slipped through my fingers like sand. "It's exactly how I imagined it," I replied, keeping my voice level. "And I'm not here for a reunion, if that's what you think. I'm here to talk to my father." She hesitated, looking behind her as if checking for his approval. It struck me again how much she had changed everything. She was the one who had taken his attention, his affection, all the things I had always fought for. And now she was still playing the part of the dutiful wife, the woman who could do no wrong. But I wasn't going to play along. Not anymore. "He's in his study," she finally said, moving aside to let me pass. Her hand brushed the doorframe as if trying to hold on to something familiar, something that wasn't about to fall apart. Didn't hesitate. I walked past her, my footsteps purposeful, echoing through the hallway. Every inch of this house felt foreign now, as if it belonged to someone else. I had walked these halls 1,000 times as a child, but now they seemed to suffocate me. When I reached the door to his study, I didn't knock. I simply opened it. He looked up from his desk, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then just as quickly, the mask slid back into place. "Claire," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "What are you doing? Here?" It took everything in me not to snap at him, not to scream, to accuse him of everything he had done to me, to us. But I held it in. This wasn't the time for rage. I wasn't here to beg for forgiveness or to explain myself. I was here to show him just how far apart we had grown, and how little I needed him now. "I came to talk," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I think you owe me that much." He didn't reply immediately. His eyes searched mine, as though trying to figure out who this version of me was, the girl who had disappeared that night, the woman standing before him now. He didn't like what he saw, I could tell, but I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. "You took everything from me," I said, each word deliberate, cutting through the space between us like a blade. "You destroyed everything I worked for, and now you want me to come crawling back, to be part of your perfect little family again." He shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. He didn't even try to justify himself. And that was all the answer I needed. "You think you can control me, but you can't," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "You never could." His jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought he might actually say something, defend himself, or apologize, but instead, he just sat there, staring at me. I was done waiting for him to speak. "I'm not your daughter anymore, Dad," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I'm not that girl anymore." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him to process my words. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard him call after me, but I didn't look back. I had said everything I needed to say. I didn't go back to the room I'd been staying in. There was no need to pretend anymore, no need to play by their rules, as if things could ever be normal again. They weren't. I had made sure of that. The house felt hollow now, each step I took reverberating with the weight of what had happened, with the knowledge that nothing between us would ever be the same. I walked outside, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the warmth of the house. The garden, too, seemed different now, empty, like everything else. It wasn't just the house, it was everything I had once known. My family, my past. It all felt like a distant memory I couldn't reach anymore, not even if I tried. I stood by the garden gate, my fingers resting on the cold metal. I could still hear the voices inside, the murmur of conversation drifting through the windows. But I didn't care. They were all still pretending. They had no idea what it meant to lose something real, not like I had. A car engine revved in, the distance, and I knew instantly who it was. It was her, the one who had replaced my mother, the one who had taken my place in so many ways, the one who had become the new center of his world. She was coming to find me, to beg me to stay, to make everything right again. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I had made my decision. I'd walked away once, and I wasn't going back. Not for her, not for him. The car pulled up just behind me, and I didn't turn. I didn't need to look to know it was her. The same polished voice, the same practiced smile. She got out of the car, her heels clicking sharply on the gravel. "I'm not going to beg you," she said, her tone more defensive than I expected. "But you can't just walk away from everything, Claire." I turned slowly, my gaze steady. She stood there, arms crossed, her expression tight, trying to hold on to her composure. The same woman who had once charmed everyone in this family now seemed as brittle as glass. It didn't matter. I didn't care about her charm anymore. I didn't care about her at all. "You can't keep everything," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You can't just take what you want and leave the rest behind." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you've suffered? You think you're the only one who's lost something? I've been here, Claire. I've been here for him, through all the mess you left behind. I've tried to be what he needed." "You think I left mess?" I raised an eyebrow. No, I was just the one who saw it for what it was. She didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not now, not ever. I took a step closer, not out of anger, but because I needed her to understand. I've made my choices. You can't fix this. You can't fix me. Her face shifted, the anger giving way to something else. Maybe pity, maybe regret. But by then, it didn't matter. I had already made my decision. I'm leaving, I said. I'm going to take control of my life. I'm going to build something for myself. And you can keep playing the part if that's what you want. I turned away, leaving her standing there, speechless. I didn't look back this time because there was nothing left for me to return to. I had walked away before, and this time, I was walking towards something new. I didn't expect to feel anything as I walked away from the house. No regret, no lingering sense of loss, but there was a strange quiet inside me, like the space that had once been filled with rage and heartbreak had finally emptied out, leaving only the echo of what could have been. The further I walked, the more the sounds of the house faded behind me. The crunch of gravel beneath my feet, the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze, these sounds felt like my own now, grounding me in a reality that was mine to shape. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to explain myself. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the lights of the house flickered in my periphery, distant and unimportant. I could feel the weight of my choices settling on me, but it wasn't the crushing kind of weight. It was the weight of freedom. A freedom I hadn't known in years. I found the old car I had hidden away in a nearby garage. My father had always kept it tucked out of sight, as if to remind me that I wasn't allowed to use it, that I wasn't worthy of the things that were mine by right. But now, I slid behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine hummed to life, steady and familiar. It was then that I realized I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the version of myself they had tried to force me into, the quiet, obedient daughter who didn't question, who didn't make waves. The girl who had once believed that maybe, just maybe, they'd come to love her the way she wanted to be loved. I wasn't that girl anymore, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite my story, not when I had the chance to write my own. Sprite stretched ahead of me, empty and open, like the future I had ahead of me. I could feel the weight of the past in the rearview mirror, but I didn't look back. Not this time. The past was over, and all I could do now was build what came next. TT, and didn't matter if they understood. It didn't matter if they ever saw what I had become. I had learned long ago that their approval was nothing more than a hollow thing, temporary, fleeting. What mattered now was what I thought of myself, what I had the courage to do. And I wasn't going to let anything or anyone hold me back. I drove through the night, my headlights casting long shadows on the road ahead, my mind clear for the first time in years. I had a plan, and I knew where I was going. There would be no more waiting for permission, no more asking for approval. As the miles slipped by, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. There was no more pretending, no more playing. By their rules, I was finally free, and nothing, no one, would ever control me again.